it's mind blowing to me that some of these things, this was the first time I'd heard it discussed in this level of like precision, from somebody senior that's been successful in their career and stuff. But I wish I had this resource, just this Coda doc, which I'll put in the show notes. I wish I had this Coda doc 10 years ago. It would have made me such a better operator.
I think it's great too. You kind of learn through fire with some of this stuff, but having it like at your fingertips.
Have you ever been in a conversation that just goes down a million rabbit holes and
Every day
feels completely rudderless?
Every day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
It could be from the person organizing the meeting, but it also could be like a lack of managing the meeting itself and letting other people go down rabbit holes. I see both quite often, but typically it starts by bad meeting management, or like not knowing like where the core problem or topic that we're trying to solve for is.
Exactly. That's kind of where I was going. I have a senior leader. He's our chief product officer at Circle. And we deal with a lot of really ambiguous, tricky problems. We're trying to build internet finance. It doesn't exist. And so there's just a lot of complexity in our business. And when we're dealing with these problems, it's rabbit hole city, but whenever Nikhil is in the room, the conversation is always focused. It's something that I've noticed over the last couple of years, is that whenever he's there, if it's going off track, he's always the one to bring it back. Or if he is starting the conversation, it always is just right up the middle. And like, wow, like that's got to be like a 10x skill if you can figure out how to do that. So I asked him, I was like, do you spend time thinking, or did you spend time thinking or learning how to like keep conversations focused? And he like lit up. he's like, yes, I spent an incredible amount of time thinking about this, working on it. It's called framing. He sent me an article on it, and then he continued to talk for about 20 minutes on what framing is and why it matters. And so I wanted to talk to you about framing because I've done it, I think, indirectly in my career so far. But since this conversation with Nikhil, I've put a lot more focus into it, especially
Fantastic.
when I'm running a conversation. And it is really, really helpful. It's really helpful to focus a conversation. So the simple definition that I have, it's the process. Framing is the process of breaking down a problem into a set of choices, trade-offs, and options that can enable a team to make a call and move forward. So, like you said, meetings, they tend to go down rabbit holes or feel rudderless or feel unfocused when there isn't a good problem definition up front. We don't know what we're solving for. So we just start talking about solutions and we're all over the place and all of this stuff. But think about the word, right? Framing. If a proper frame is set around the conversation, we are here today to discuss this problem and enumerate this set of options. And this is the outcome we're trying to drive to. If everybody has an alignment on that, then you're going to be able to move the ball forward. He gave this really funny example where he is like, humans are capable of anything. Humans are capable of anything. We have an alignment problem. That's the problem. Why is there not a high-speed light rail that goes from Southern California all the way to Seattle? Why? It's an alignment problem. We have the technology, we have the budget, we know how to do it. But we can't align a disparate group of folks to make a series of decisions to build a light rail. And that would be super valuable to reduce traffic and blah, blah, blah. But so alignment is like the key problem. And this is the issue, is that when you get into complexity, get pulled down these rabbit holes because people are optimizing for their own individual interests or their own interpretation of the problem. And so the process of framing is defining a clear problem, the clear question that we're trying to answer, and enumerating a set of options so that you can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about like that skill and how to do
Mm.
that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that as long as we can all line up front on what we're all here to accomplish, whether it be answering a question or doing something together, everybody can always point back to that call and that goal as a way of cutting the fat and staying focused. Is that essentially the core?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few benefits, and you named one of them is that you're aligning a group of people on a against a common mission. There are a few other benefits. You're establishing common language. So I have articulated the problem, and so now everybody else is using the same language as me to discuss that problem,
Mm-hmm.
which just leads to more productive conversations.
Yeah.
We'll go through some of this other stuff as well, but it helps you enumerate options against that problem. It helps include people in solving for the problem. It helps you get to sticky, durable decisions. These are all benefits of a good frame, and I want to kind of dig into each one.
Cool.
So the first step in framing is defining what he calls what Nikhil calls a threshold question.
Mm. Interesting concept.
He calls it a threshold question, just basically we're gathered here today to answer this threshold question, make sure everyone understands and internalizes the threshold question, why we chose it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're at a point now where like we've been in the abstract a little bit, so I want to give a couple of tangible examples.
That would be helpful.
We can do one from, by the way, taking a step back, like this is to deal with any decision space that has a complex number of dimensions. Doesn't have to just be at work, could be in life in general. The first example that I have is a life example.
Mm.
So the example, like a lot of people want to be financially independent, myself included, or financially free. And that's the problem. And the common thing, like when you want to be financially independent or you start caring about your personal finances, is you look at your money, look where you're spending all of your money, and what is the common guidance? It's like, oh well, like the first place you should look is like cut your spending, right? Live within your means.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at all the categories of what you're spending money on. You're like, holy shit, I spend $200 a month on coffee. Like, babe, we got to stop going to Starbucks. Like, and then for, weeks and weeks and months, like you look at your numbers every month, like, oh fuck, like $250 at Starbucks. And then you have an argument over how many mocha frappuccinos your wife bought, and then blah 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 blah. Like that happens over and over and over again.
This sounds like a
And
conversation in the Magnet House.
well, the coffee shop
You
is
guys love
not
coffee. I've seen
Starbucks.
your walks.
Yeah, the coffee shop is not Starbucks. It is a place called Flamingos, and yeah, we keep that place in business. But the problem with that is you're asking yourself the wrong question, right? You're asking yourself like, how can I stop spending money on coffee? Or how can I stop spending less money on some of these like ticky tack things? It's ineffective because the framing of the problem is poor. Like, how do we spend less money on coffee? But really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to become financially independent. So, a good framing of that problem is like, how do we constantly increase our investment rate? Because it's a different question serving the same goal, but it reorients you in the right way. Because spending less money on coffee is too focused. Increasing your investment rate means how can I make more money? How can I marginally reduce my expenses? How can I reallocate my investments towards higher returning investments?
Mm-hmm. Before we get deeper into that, I want to make a distinction because what I'm hearing is you're saying that it might be too specific of a problem, but at the top you said the first thing that people do is they say we got to cut our spending, which actually seems like a broad question, and then you get focused into saying, oh, a specific area where we're spending too much is Starbucks. So the way that you're kind of framing this is you're saying have more of an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity cutting mindset. Is that what you're trying to get across, or is there a little bit of nuance there?
I'm trying to get across that you should be asking yourself the question. You should be constantly like revisiting your threshold question
Mm-hmm.
to understand if that question is the right one to be asking. Because asking yourself, how can you stop spending money,
Mm-hmm.
yields fights with the wife over Starbucks and kind of this hamster wheel of cost cutting on ticky tack things. Whereas asking yourself the question of increasing your investment rate
Mm-hmm.
has a more tangible and outsized impact in the long term for your personal finances. So it's a better thing to focus on. It's the right thing to focus on. Hey there, real quick. Can you do us a quick favor and hit the subscribe button down there somewhere? As a new and growing pod, subscribes are really, really important for us, for people to find us. We do this for free to provide you value in your work and in your life. And if you could just do this one thing for us, it would really help us to continue providing that value. So real quick subscribe, back to the video. Happy listening.
Right. And it sounds like by asking that question, how can we increase our investment rate? One of the things that could come out of that is let's agree to reduce our spend by 50% on Starbucks, but then reallocate those monies that we're saving to an investment. Is that like one thing? Because it seems like it's more future focused with that question rather than very short term, let's get to the end of this year and save $2,000 if we stop spending $200 a week.
Yeah, it's less tactical, right? I mean, how many times in a work conversation you just get buried in the tactics or in solutioning of something when, again, like the problem isn't very clear at the beginning of the conversation.
In work, I feel like a lot of times it can go down rabbit holes depending on the audience too, if you're not careful, right? Because even that threshold question can beg, if you have strategic people in the room, like whether it be from product strategy or what have you, and then you also have technical people, depending on who you are, they could go down their own rabbit holes. Like the product strategy people can start talking about, phase 5, like what is the dream version of this product, and that's way too out into the future. And then the technical people are getting down into the very nitty gritty, how to send the, like, what parameters do we need to send in the API request,
Right.
if you're talking about software. So like that's a great first step, is that threshold question to figure out, make sure everybody's on the same page. Where I struggle with is like, all right, how do we keep both of those groups of people on the same page regardless? Like that threshold question, you're still going to have to deal with people trying to go down too many rabbit holes regardless of how well you frame it. So like I'd be curious, pulling from like your experience with Nikhil, how does, like, beyond the threshold, like what does he do to help keep people centered?
I think it's context dependent. And I know you do a lot of this because you've done it with me in the past. And it can simply be how you approach conversations. When we started talking about the podcast, you would always start the conversation with, like, what does success look like at the end of this? You're just trying to frame up the conversation. What are we trying to get out of this call? Another way to do that is like starting every conversation with the goal of the conversation. We're here today to discuss this. We are here today to discuss this customer segmentation model that we've built and get feedback on it. So if we start going off into like go to market planning, like that's out of scope for this conversation. I want to keep the frame within feedback on this deliverable. This is an example.
I like that. How do you pull people out of a rabbit hole, because they inevitably go there? Do you have an example that you can pull from your own recent experience where you've been leading a conversation and you notice it going off the rails and you've had to pull people back? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, in my younger years, when everything is a spectrum, I cared a lot more what people thought, and I was a lot softer with other people. In
Mm-hmm.
earlier years, I probably have just let it go because I was afraid, because I didn't want to be too pushy, or
Mm-hmm.
because I was like, oh, they probably know more than me. I might as well just let them like go down this rabbit hole, even though I don't think it feels right. Wrongo, terrible, bad idea. It's totally okay, especially if it's your conversation, that you're running, to stop someone and be like, hey, Derek, I understand that there is a problem here or something to discuss around solutioning, but this is not a solutioning call. We're here to talk about this doc. So can we get
Mm-hmm.
back to the dock and we can handle what you're doing offline? Like,
Mm-hmm.
totally fine. And you can do that with a smile on your face and you can do it friendly.
Mm-hmm.
But I very, very much appreciate when people do that. There's also a more coarse, annoying, shitty way to do that, which is like, can we please just get back on topic? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I hate when people do that. Like, I hate when people are like, it feels like high school a little bit.
Mm.
There is some nuance in how you word it, how you come across when you do it. But if you are very direct and the purpose of the conversation has been set at the beginning, it makes it way easier to pull people out of the rabbit hole because, as I said at the beginning, this is not a solutioning call.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to get back on track and we can find other time to talk about that thing.
Yeah. If you're trying to pull people out of a rabbit hole, one tactic that I've used that's been helpful, especially if you're not in the driver's seat of the conversation and you don't have the automatic permission to be more upfront, is I check the person that is. Hopefully they're on camera or that you could see them in person. And I interject with, "Hey, Phil, are we like hitting all the points that you wanted to in this conversation? What do you think? Are we on the right path? Because I want to make sure that we hit the objectives that you have in front of us, especially if you know what they really think. It's a way of like putting it back onto the leader instead of you all of a sudden interjecting yourself with your own ego and saying, "Hey, get back on track." It's like defer back, give that person space.
Yeah, that's cool. That because it is a little weird if it's not your call to like try to pull somebody out of the rabbit hole and be like yeah, if it wasn't my call and I was like, hey, Derek, like we're not talking about solutioning here. That's a little weird, but doing it that way is like a little bit softer, and it also probably make the person that's going down the rabbit hole feel a little.
Leading it more empowered too. The hardest part for me is that when somebody's really passionate, so like the people that are just like kind of talking and trying to figure something out on the side that give space for interjection, those are easier to pull back in. But when somebody gets down a rabbit hole and they're really passionate and they're just talking really fast and they're excited, it's so hard to find the opportunity to interject without seeming like an asshole. So one thing that I do and I've found effective is that I use the raise hand emoji or a signal in the Teams meeting or the Slack meeting, because that's a way of saying I have something to say even though I know you're talking still. you know,
Bong!
and then all of a sudden, naturally that gives people the signal to like let somebody else go because they're being polite and using the system. So that's one tactic that I think people can use to pull people back in is don't be afraid to hit that raise hand button.
I love it. Okay, so you have the threshold question, the macro question. What are we here to solve?
See, hold on. You just did it. Like this is a super meta microcosm of what you just did. We were talking about framing. We are going through here's a threshold question, and you're going down your whole process. We got into a little bit of a rabbit hole talking about pulling people out of a meeting, and then what you did, it didn't even you did what if you weren't paying attention, you would never notice it. What you did is give space and say, okay, let's go back, zoom out. What do we talk about? We talked about this threshold question. Now it gives you an opportunity to keep the order of what you want it to go down.
Yeah, good point. Good point. That yeah, I guess you do some of these things self or unconsciously.
To somebody that's new in their career, they probably wouldn't. You wouldn't have that like conscious, but like you've just done it enough where it becomes natural to you.
Yeah, for sure. So we discussed defining the threshold question. What are we here to solve? And then a second step normally is enumerating some kind of option space. You have a problem. It's complex. You don't know what the clear answer is. If you did, it wouldn't be a complex problem. And so there's probably a set of options, a set of potential paths that you can go down. And those options are going to have different trade offs on some dimensions. I love these quotes from Nikhil as well. These are things I've heard him say a couple of times. The art of framing is collapsing a complex problem into a table. If you can collapse a problem into a fucking table, you've got it. And then like another thing that he says often is what is the dimensionality of the problem? This is what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you a simple table that I just built.
So for those not on YouTube and not following along on video, what Sam has in front of us is essentially a visual version of the first quote that he just said. The art of framing is collapsing a complex problem into a table. What are we looking at right now? It's a table. So across the y-axis, you have a series of columns, option 1, option 2, option 3, and then down the x-axis, you have time to market, business opportunity, cost, reputational risk, and complexity. What I'm assuming is we're going to go through these and kind of see if each option hits one or more of these time to market, business opportunity, cost, reputational risk, complexity items to get at the end of it, understand what the best option is.
Right. And maybe I'll actually just make up a threshold question, right? It's like, how do we serve this new, interesting customer segment? There's a new customer segment on the market. Gen X or Gen Z. Gen X, they're not new. They're old. Okay, so we
What
want
is
to serve this
our
new...
kids' generation, by the way? What's
I can't remember. It's something cool
2000?
sounding.
Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha, dude.
Gee,
My bad, yeah.
what a badass. Yeah, good for them.
Does that mean like beta comes after them? We just cycle through the alphabet? Is that how that works?
The next one after that's going to be like, I don't identify with the generation.
Oh man,
Generation
some
question
people are
mark.
gonna love that comment. All right, back into the table, Mr. Rabbit Hole. Okay, so how do we serve this new interesting customer segment? What's the dimensionality of that problem? I totally made these up, but okay, like how fast can we get to market to serve them? What's the size of the business opportunity? How much is it going to cost us? Was there a reputational risk in serving this customer segment for any reason? How complex is it? These are all like things that may matter in trying to make this decision. And then you have options. You have options of what to do. You could build a new thing to serve them. You could buy a new thing and integrate it. You could do nothing. There's a bunch of different options. These are just 3 examples, right? But the art of framing and getting to options enumeration is like getting the exhaustive set of options out on the table against the right dimensions and then basically populating this table. And there's a few cool things about being able to do this. One is it's inclusive. This is not meant to be a solo journey. You bring other people into this effort to get all of the options on the table, to figure out the right dimensions, to pressure test your assumptions, to bring people along with you on this journey. 2, which is very connected, it provides durable, sticky decisions. Durable decisions are so important to move quickly. And so, what's an example of the antithesis of that? A non-durable decision. Well, 6 months ago, someone came in and they were like, hey, we should serve Gen Alpha. They're going to be like this hot new customer segment where we can sell them a bunch of shoes. Like they're going to be super consumers of these like athletic running shoes. We have to sell these guys. And then we went through this analysis and we talked about it. And we ultimately decided, look, not for us right now. We need to focus on millennials because that's where all the money is today. Okay. 6 months goes by. Facts and circumstances haven't necessarily changed, but we hired a new go-to-market person. And they were like, yo, have you heard of Gen Alpha? They would love shoes. We should sell them shoes. And then what ensues is the same analysis that you did 6 months ago. Why? Because that decision was not durable. It wasn't sticky. Why wasn't it sticky? There are reasons. Maybe you weren't exhaustive about all the possibilities. Maybe you didn't have every option enumerated in the table. But more likely, not everybody felt like they owned this table, like they had input into it. And so if not everybody had input into it, then I don't feel like I own that decision or that I had a part in that decision 6 months ago. So I'm happy to revisit it 6 months later. And this is what starts to create waste because you can do this over and over and over and over again. And I've seen that happen many, many a time at Circle, and it causes a ton of waste. It's super sad.
So it sounds like the shared ownership, the sense of inclusivity is important to the idea of framing. Like, what's a way to make people feel like it's a shared sense of ownership? Is that essentially inherent in the threshold question, or are there additional things that kind of help enable that?
Seth Godin has this awesome concept of thrashing early. Basically, when taking on a new project, do all the messy stuff up front. Thrash early. Like book a long working session with a bunch of people, get all the options on the table, use a whiteboard, be messy, get everything out there. Include all of the different perspectives, all of the different ways that it could possibly be solved, and then chop it down and make it nice and organized, and then like go and execute
Mm-hmm.
upon it. Thrash
Mm-hmm.
early. So in that process of thrashing early, you're building this table. That's what you're doing. That's like the output that you want of this thrash. And you want everybody to feel like they had input into that. Another great Nikhil quote: no one can escape the table. So like no one can after the decision is made be like, oh well, we didn't consider this, or like, why didn't we think about this? It was included in the table. Nobody can escape the table. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, you excel. Folks would love that. I do love the concept because even you can use that same thing outside of the context of a table and just say like if you're working with a group of people and you're working on a project, you could relate that to writing a book together or writing a paper together where the first draft that you create is going to have far more than the final version and it's not even going to be all good, but like one concept of a really good first draft is that the first draft is just everything that you can and don't even worry if it sucks or not, but get through to the end of what the universe of what that paper or that book could be, and then start chopping it up and organizing into chapters. It sounds like you can use that relationship synonymously there.
Yeah, exactly. And like you were there. You were there in that initial draft. Compliance team and IT team and product team and sales team. You guys were there for this to help solve for this threshold question that we defined that was relevant to you in your world. You were there.
So continuing to build that out. So if the first time that you're getting a group together and you're leading this thing, the first session is going to be messy. It's going to be longer. You're going to basically have at the end like a really bad table or a really long document with everybody's input. Between that meeting and the next meeting, you should have done a lot of work to organize those things and maybe have some one off conversations with folks to expand upon some of their ideas. But by the time you hit the next meeting, the second meeting, it's going to be organized, which means that there's going to be some things, some input that somebody else had that didn't make the cut. It's off the list. What I think would be a really good next step for that second meeting is that when you start the meeting, recap the decisions and conversations and where we are today that changed between the first time we met and now and why, so that you don't completely remove somebody's idea and they're left thinking, hey, you're like, okay, well then they don't give a shit about what I have to say, so I'm not going to pipe up. They should have a sense of if there's a true inclusion ownership, they should have some understanding of why that decision wasn't kept, or that idea wasn't stuck, didn't stick.
That's a great point. Is it's not just a point in time thing. This whole concept of thrashing early, it's not a point in time thing. It's in practical terms, right? It's going to happen over a series of days, weeks, maybe even months. Who knows? Depending on how big the decision is or whatever.
Does that threshold question change as time goes on, or should that threshold question be durable like you mentioned and stand the test of time?
It should be durable until you can convince yourself that it's the wrong question to be asking. And that can happen all the time. All the time. So it's never like you define a threshold question, you define a problem, and that problem is evergreen into the sunset.
Mm-hmm.
When I started the strategy function in Circle, I started reading about like how to do strategy because I'd never done it before. And I read all of these like Bain and McKinsey books. These like the processes and the frameworks and the things that the best strategy consultants in the world use when doing this. And their process is actually very, very simple when it comes down to it. Doing the work is the difficult part, but it's a very high level thing of, it's not dissimilar from this. It's problem definition, options enumeration, testing, revisiting the problem, doing that again and again and again, revisiting the problem, doing it again and again and again, until you get to a solution that you feel is airtight.
Mm.
That's like a hyper simplified consulting engagement from Bain or McKinsey, is exactly that. And you're never going to get the problem statement right on the first try in like a strategy consulting context. If it's something simple at work, maybe it's abundantly clear what the problem is. But problem definition is one of the hardest things, man.
Yeah, the concept of framing in the context of like a group activity has a lot of synergies with the framework that we talked about, the flywheel that the CIA agent Andrew from the Stephen Bartlett podcast talked about, which is you have information, then you get knowledge, and then you test it through experience, and then through that experience you get more information, and the whole thing kind of continues. It's the exact same cycle here, but with a group of people, and the way that you can anchor yourself to all stay aligned and working together and progressing in the same direction is revisiting that threshold question and like tightening it up as you go, right? um, I'm kind of like picturing a rope where everybody's kind of like this is the thing that everybody is connected to, and if we swing too far out, like we always have that rope that we kind of like use the centrifugal motion. I don't even know, what am I talking about? Am I physics? I don't know. Don't judge me.
Centrifugal is a fun word to say. Yeah, man. I like we're literally living through this right now at Circle, where we make an internet dollar, and now other companies are making internet money market funds that earn yield.
Mm-hmm.
And our initial approach to it was like, okay, that's going to happen. How do we partner with these guys and make sure there's synergies with our business? So the threshold question was, how do we partner with internet money market funds? That was the question we asked ourselves. Went down 6 months, built a product in that space, built a huge partnership in that space, learned a bunch, and then we're like, oh fuck, this is cannibalizing our business. We were asking the wrong question. And so now we revisit it. And we're like, okay, should we build in that space? Should we build our own internet money market fund? Or how do we reduce cannibalization with our partnership? Those are like questions that we're sorting through now. So like these things they can be very complicated and very costly if you default to the wrong question. So yeah, they should always be malleable. They should always be able to be revisited and changed based on whatever you're learning.
The idea of the table, I love it because while you don't always need to use a table, it's very clearly pulling from a picture is worth 1,000 words sort of mentality. And I think this was in the link that you shared as well, which is there's power in a great visual diagram as a way to anchor the group onto a unified goal objective. In that our left brain is analysis based and our right brain is creative. A great diagram that takes that complexity and puts it into a simple visual for everybody to look at and understand is so powerful in the grounding aspect. So if you have a good question, if you have that good threshold question, and you have some visual that's beyond just a bunch of text for people to ingest,
Yeah.
I think that combination is where you start to really get magic and you accelerate the group's alignment. Because at the end of the day, we have a picture means a lot to us humans. It's very simple to understand if done right.
I couldn't agree more. And I default to tables in most of my complex decision making because I love spreadsheets, but it does not always have to be a table. There any kind of diagram or visual that's explaining again the dimensionality of the problem or what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, like if we're sharing visuals, I'll share my version of your version or my version of the same sort of thing. So here is something that I used this week, and you can't really see it well because it's all zoomed out. But what this is essentially is a diagram that takes through like the user experience of each step along the journey of a user. So like on the left side you see a list of all the teams and platforms that are involved in the project, and then which teams are responsible for what part of the customer journey. So, as a way of us anchoring the conversation about building out this end to end solution with four different complex systems that have to communicate and work
Mm.
together, we were able to have a much more effective and like synergy based conversation because it gave us a starting point and an anchor for each step. So we know that we had to talk about each one of these things independently. And then we could always come back. Okay, where were we when we just left off? We made a decision. Okay, let's get back into the cart building for e-commerce. So this sort of thing I use all the time, especially in programming and software development, understanding which systems are responsible and interacting with each other and what stage of the user experience.
Brilliant. So one acknowledgement that I've had since I've kind of bridged the gap from a doer to somebody that's more strategic or more senior or whatever is that if you have the ability to make things simple for people, complex things simple, that's a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be anything. That could be a complex technical solution. That could be dimensionalizing a complex problem, whatever. It could be explaining a complex thing in just a sentence. That's an art, and if you spend time on that,
Yep.
that's a skill to be learned. It's a skill to be learned, and it's a very valuable skill to be learned. And yeah, I agree. Just the practice of okay, how like there's this complex thing I'm working on. How can I like make that into just a little visual, you
Yeah.
know, with
Yeah.
a few boxes and not that many words that I can talk through, and it'll just click, click, click.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep like a pad that on my desk where I just scribble this shit like all day.
Yeah.
Um, it's very very helpful for me.
Yeah, I look a lot like the like helpful visuals on the surface look so simple, but sure enough, behind that 90% of the thinking that goes into that is not so simple. So people sometimes get confused that like, oh, if you do something simple, then there's probably not a lot of thought going into it. No, 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 no. Usually it means they're a complete reverse. Something is so easy to understand because so much thought has went into it in the first place, and so many different perspectives have been taken into account building this simple thing in different versions of it. So this visual that I just shared, that diagram, that was like the fifth version. The first version was much more robust, had a lot more words, wasn't even a diagram, it was just like a list of different things. And so you're not going to maybe have this like clear visual from day one, but it's something that you should aim to build out as you're going and as you're defining these things.
It's like watching Chef Curry on the basketball court, man. Just makes it look easy, you know? Makes it look easy tossing up threes from all around. And you don't see the years and years and hours and hours and hours that he put in at the gym figuring out how to do that and honing his craft. The same kind of principle applies here. It's like it takes a lot of reps and a lot of trying and a lot of iterating to get to simple.
How do I know if I didn't frame something well? Let's start there. Like that's as I'm thinking about somebody that's coming in new to their career, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, interested in it. They might have just gotten their first assignment that's feeling a little bit overwhelming. Like what are some indications that I'm not framing something well?
There's some obvious stuff, like if somebody else is asking what the goal of this conversation is, if your projects, it's a feeling too, right? If your projects are feeling rudderless, like you feel like you're having the same conversations over and over again, explaining the same thing over and over again, or if you're on month 6 of something that should only have taken a couple of months, maybe you have a framing problem. I think a lot of these things you can kind of feel.
I think that if you have your second meeting and there's not a clear iteration on top of what you already did and you're rehashing a lot of things, or there weren't clear owners on certain things, that's a pretty good indication that there's not a lot of clarity in terms of where we're going with this thing and what the goals are. A lot of times I see scenarios, especially at the beginning of a project defining, like defining a project at the beginning when you're designing things, that if something isn't framed well, all the teams will take their own definition of what they're supposed to do. And then when you meet again, it's like we all went in different directions.
Yeah.
That's one indication to me. Is like, if is everybody going in the same direction, or does it feel like everybody is kind of like making their own decisions and they're conflicting with each other and we're rehashing? To your point.
Yeah, there's, again, I kind of get back to feel, because when your team or the group of people you're working with is aligned towards a common mission, you can feel it, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels good. Like work is almost seamless when that is happening. You're not burning cycles on alignment. You're
Mm-hmm.
just problem solving and then figuring it out and moving quickly and getting to the next step. And you can feel that kind of momentum,
Mm.
and you can feel the converse of that as well. Another thing is simply asking. I mean, I just started a new job at Circle, and it's this complex, ambiguous new problem to go and figure out. And I wrote a doc, and I had a couple of meetings on it already. And I asked some of the more senior folks that are in there, like, was it clear? How did that meeting go? That kind of stuff. And yeah, people don't hold back. They're like, nah, it's super not clear to me. I don't understand yet. And I'm like, that's great. Like, now I know. I have data. Like, I got to work on my framing.
Mm-hmm.
So soliciting feedback is also a great way to figure it out.
Yeah.
Nobody does that
Yeah.
enough.
Is that the pod? I mean, is there anything that we didn't hit in frame? Because like this is a very important topic. I think that it's very underrated in terms of its value in the workplace.
It's mind blowing to me that some of these things, this was the first time I'd heard it discussed in this level of like precision, from somebody senior that's been successful in their career and stuff. But I wish I had this resource, just this Coda doc, which I'll put in the show notes. I wish I had this Coda doc 10 years ago. It would have made me such a better operator.
I think it's great too. You kind of learn through fire with some of this stuff, but having it like at your fingertips up front, I mean, gold.
Yeah, like learning by getting thrown into the fire is great, but having first principles allows you to accelerate.
100%.
All right, brother. Good stuff. That is Le Pod. Zip it up. Zip it out.
See you in a bit, or see you in another time.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us at The Workflow. If you like what you just heard, could you take 1 second and give us a like, subscribe, follow, or leave a review on the platform you're listening to this podcast? It will really help us out as we're growing the pod. We'd also love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, folks you'd want us to chat with, or any feedback in general, just shoot us a note at workflowshow@gmail.com. Again, that's workflowshow@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.